What is a supporting character? Is it just a character that isn't the lead of the story, but may on occasion get more focused than usual? Who, after having exhausted their purpose to the story, will either fade away into the background or be lucky enough to get a few more moments in the spotlight due to their popularity? Well, if we were to consult the first resource available online, we would find the following definition. A supporting character is a character in a narrative that is not the focus of the story, but is important to the plot/protagonist, and appears or is mentioned in the story enough to be more than just a minor character or a cameo appearance. Now, I'm not one to hold up Wikipedia as the holy grail of information, but I think this definition is a good starting point. Most definitions you find will follow a similar idea. A supporting actor or actress is one who has an important part, but not the most important part. A supporting character is a character that's not the main focus, but supports the protagonist to ultimately help them achieve their goal, have a transformation, or move the story forward. Additionally, a supporting character does not have to support the protagonist and can be antagonistic instead. A character that is not the protagonist or antagonist, but still plays a vital role in the plot. While the story may not revolve around them, they are still pivotal in adding depth and dimension to the main characters and the story. Supporting characters bring life to a narrative by creating and resolving conflict, offering comic relief, contributing to character development, and serving various other character roles that make the story exciting and engaging to the readers. Among these definitions are three reoccurring rules for supporting characters. Number 1, they support the main character, or the antagonist. In some way, they assist the main character or antagonist in helping them achieve their goal and progress the story forward. Number 2, they are vital to the plot. The character contributes something to the plot. Additionally, it helps if what they offer is exciting or engaging to the readers. And most importantly, number 3, they aren't the main character. The character in question is not the focus of the story. For the rest of the video, I'll be operating under this definition of a supporting character, because I believe that these rules get to the heart of what a supporting character is. That being that they are a character that exists to support the narrative, obviously. Supporting characters are not the focus of the story. They are characters that will ideally strengthen or progress the narrative while being an enjoyable addition to the cast for the readers. Put simply, they exist to enhance what is already there. Considering all of this, I would argue that there are few supporting characters in all fiction that meet the criteria established as splendidly as Akira Kuno of Undead Unluck. Akira first appeared in the Autumn arc, though they were mentioned prior to the arc under the alias of Anno Un, the author of our protagonist's favourite manga. With his debut, Akira won the hearts of many readers, charming us from the get-go with his carefree attitude while luring us in with the many mysteries he appeared to be hiding. This love continued to grow with each chapter featuring them, and nowadays they're basically the most beloved character in the community. Which might not sound that impressive, but it's significantly more noticeable when you consider that Akira is restricted to the Autumn arc. They debut in the arc, and by the end of it, they're written out of the story. But in both popularity polls for the series, Akira Kuno is in the top 4. This might make sense for the first popularity poll, which started on the final chapter of the Autumn arc, so a lot of the love for Akira was fresh in the reader's mind. And at that point in the story, it could be argued that there weren't any other clear fan favorites. But the second popularity poll started 90 chapters after the Autumn arc, close to 2 years since it finished. A lot happened in those chapters. Characters had gone through full arcs and been relevant to each one since the Autumn arc, yet Akira still got the 4th spot. Though in fairness, Akira is not the only character to pull something like this off, because Gina got 6th place in the first poll despite dying in the first 10 chapters, but this isn't our video. So how did this happen? What makes everyone love Akira so much? Well, honestly, Akira is just that good of a character. He has an endearing personality that spices up the arc, as well as having a tragic and emotional backstory that is easy to sympathize with. Going a bit further, and considering him from a writing standpoint, Akira brings in a training arc that introduces an element to the power system that is adored by fans. He's also the heart of the arc's emotional climax that reinforces the lesson our leads learned throughout their training. Honestly, it's no wonder that he's so loved after the climax of the arc. But if I was to go even further and speak for myself, part of my love comes from how meta his character feels, with him almost feeling like a commentary on the role of a supporting character in fiction, as well as the influence fictional characters can have on the readers. There is, in my opinion, a beautiful irony to Akira's character that isn't fully acknowledged. But to talk about that, we first need to understand how Akira is a supporting character. So, using the rules we've already established, let's look at how he meets the criteria for supporting characters. Because looking at how he supports the story will tell us why Akira's presence is so felt in the short time he had. And why I personally believe that Akira Kuno is one of the greatest supporting characters ever known. The most important rule to a supporting character is that they must support the main cast. I mean, obviously, it's literally in the name. And much like how this rule is obviously important to a supporting character, it should be equally as obvious that Akira does fulfill this role in his time in the story. He actually does it in various ways. One of the resources I used earlier when establishing this definition listed a few archetypes that supporting characters can fall into, and I think this is worth mentioning because Akira can fall into each archetype provided. Number 1. Supporters. While this is admittedly a minor part to their character, Akira is kind of a comedic character when we first meet them, with him playing the fool and letting Andy and Fuko walk all over him for comedic effect. This comedic side of Akira was a big part of what charmed readers initially, because his interactions with Fuko and Andy made him fun to read. I'd argue it also helped him stand out, since going into the arc we figured he'd be this all-knowing prophet giving them information, but instead we met this goofy guy. It was refreshing, and made him more interesting than if he was just your usual wise and all-knowing prophet. Speaking of, number 2, those that provide information. This is the archetype Akira best falls into, with him actually matching up with every example provided. He's a prophet because he has seen the future and is trying to communicate it towards the main cast. His knowledge of the future also pushes him into the wise man role. But most importantly, Akira is a mentor figure and teacher during the Autumn arc. And before we go any further, I think now is a good time to actually talk about the Autumn arc and Akira's involvement in it. The Autumn arc serves as your standard shonen battle arc, while also being a training arc that is secretly a character-focused arc in disguise. What blurs the line here is that training, or powering up, is a little different in Undead Unluck. Rather than sending Andy and Fuko off to go train and get stronger, Akira sends Fuko into Andy's memories so that she can better understand him, and ultimately bring about a change within him. This change that Akira is aiming for is a change in philosophy, which is the key to powering up in Undead Unluck. And honestly, I don't want to get too carried away here, but I do kind of need to talk about this, so it's time for me to gush about how great the power system of Undead Unluck is. The negation abilities of Undead Unluck are tied towards the character's own understanding of the concept they are negating. For Andy and Fuko, they negate the concepts of dead and luck. The result is that Andy negates anything that would directly cause his own death, while Fuko negates luck by bestowing bad luck upon anyone that touches her directly. At this point in the story, we haven't gotten too many complex abilities, and I'd say that it's after this point that we start to really dive into fun concepts and philosophies for the cast and their abilities. But the first real example we get in the series is Andy. Andy initially believed that dying is just simply when your brain stops, because when the brain stops, everything else stops. You can no longer grow and change, and so your existence in this world is put to a halt. This philosophy reflects the personality of the current Andy, who is kind of jaded by his immortality and the loss of many comrades. But when he talks with Fuko, she challenges this idea and proposes that someone dies when they're forgotten, because she believes that while they are dead, her parents still live on within her, encouraging her to continue. She assures Andy that this is also true for his own comrades, and this mentality sways Andy's perception of death, giving him hope that in some way his comrades live on through his memory. What this means for Andy as a fighter is that the specifics of his regeneration have now changed. Before this point, Andy could only regenerate from the head, but now Andy can regenerate from any part of his body. This change in philosophy also leads into more creative uses of Fuko's Unluck, giving them a major power-up that will help defeat Autumn. It's a tremendous moment for the series because linking your power system to the philosophy of the character holding the power is a brilliant decision from a writing standpoint. It essentially means that character growth is tied into ability growth, and it opens so many possibilities that the rest of the series continues to deliver on. And all of this is only possible because of Akira. Akira saw the future and realized that Fuko and Andy would fail, so he worked hard to gather all the necessary artifacts that would help them grow stronger. He devoted his life to training them. If that isn't a mentor figure, I don't know what is. But going back to those archetypes, there's still one more that Akira fits into. Number 3, antagonists are also support. Akira doesn't just support Andy and Fuko, he also supports Rip, who is kind of an antagonist for the arc. Rip does join forces with Andy and Fuko temporarily to beat Autumn, but he is introduced as an antagonist. He was there to beat and secure Autumn for Under, as well as getting hold of Akira and his information on the future. He had no intentions to work with Andy and Fuko, and in the original timeline, his group being there is what leads to Fuko dying. But Akira still provides support for him. It's not a full training arc like for Andy and Fuko, but he does restore Rip to his original body. In Akira's final act for the arc, he uses an artifact to revert Rip back to his proper age, at the cost of adding 150 years to his own life, resulting in his death. Well, kind of. It doesn't kill Akira, but it does destroy the decoy he's using to interact with the world. But now that Rip is back to normal, he can fight more efficiently, making it possible for the whole group to beat Autumn if they work together. It's easy to argue that Akira only did this because he was confident Rip would eventually cooperate, and so was indirectly helping Andy and Fuko here, but I do believe that Akira genuinely wanted to help Rip as well. He loves and owes Rip just as much as he does Andy and Fuko, and at the time of helping, there was no real confirmation that Rip would cooperate. In fact, he had literally just shut down the idea. So I think it's fair to say that Akira willingly plays the support role for the antagonist. So, does Akira support the main cast? Obviously. The whole point of Akira's character is that he wants to support Andy and Fuko. He wants to avoid the terrible future he saw as a child. To do that, he sends them off to train, and even provides support for Rip so that they can beat Autumn together. In doing this, we avoid the original bad ending and push the story into a new stage that Akira has yet to see. So yeah, Akira does support the cast. But even more importantly, he supports the story, because without their support, there wouldn't really be anything else to the story of Undead Unluck, which I guess leads us into the next rule. We've already established this point. Without Akira, there's really nothing else to this story. His actions are what prevent the horrible and hopeless ending he saw as a child. Akira is vital to Undead Unluck. We don't need to reconfirm that. So let's focus on the side note for this rule. It helps if what they offer is exciting or engaging to the readers. Which might sound redundant, because if a character is vital to the plot, they'll be well received by the readers, right? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. A character can be vital to the plot, while still being uninteresting or boring to the reader. If a character is just a plot device that serves no purpose beyond advancing the story, the readers probably won't have a reason to care for the character. And if the readers don't care for the character, why should they care for the story beat they're introducing? You need to give the reader a reason to care about these developments and the character introducing them. And Akira does a great job of this. His introduction to the story builds up the mystique of his character, raising a bunch of questions for the reader. Who is this guy? How does he know the future? What does he know about the future? Whose side is he on? His introduction draws us in because we're eager to have these questions answered. From the get-go, we're already engaged with this character because we want to know more. Akira then sets up an exciting training arc that establishes important rules for the universe as well as providing depth for its already existing characters. So it already seems pretty obvious that Akira is an exciting addition to the story with his introduction. But I'd argue that the bigger reason for his popularity is because he's also emotionally engaging. Akira's backstory is tragic and easy to sympathize with. In the short time we have with them, the story does a good job of establishing the relationship between Akira and his mother as a positive one, with all of Akira's goals and aspirations in life being brought about by this relationship. He started creating stories because he loved making his mother smile with them. He wanted to be a mangaka because it was his dream to have his mother read a book he had created. We learn all of this, then have to watch Akira's negation ability completely cut off this relationship, which is really tragic and might hit hard for some readers. But even if you can't connect with Akira's relationship with his mother, you can still understand the horror of this situation. From his mother's perspective, Akira has just suddenly disappeared. She has no idea where he is or what happened to him. All she can do is pray that her son is alive and happy somewhere. And all Akira can do is watch her suffer silently as she prays to the god that caused all of this. What makes this worse is that Akira knows there is a grim fate awaiting the world, but there's nothing he can do to prevent it. It's a horrible scenario thrust upon a child, but Akira's reaction to this is why fans love him. He didn't just give up and accept the cruel fate he was dealt. He chose to fight back, inspired by the characters he saw when he picked up the G lineup, because they didn't give up when the going was tough. They fought for what they wanted, and so Akira wants to fight for his dreams too. Which is something that I think is a little undersold when it comes to Akira's character, that being that he has his own arc before he joins the fight against God. Sure, it's a mini arc reduced to one chapter, but it does a lot to sell Akira to the readers. He didn't give up and fought for his dream of becoming a published mangaka, and despite the overwhelming odds stacked against him, he was able to do it on his own. And even if it may not have been the way he wanted it to happen, Akira was able to make his mother smile with his own published manga in the end. Only then, after having accomplished his own goals and proven himself as a character, does Akira enter the battle against God, wanting to pay back the characters that got him this far. People often talk about how Akira is a self-insert for Tozuka, and I agree that there's a lot of logic to this argument. Tozuka himself likes Akira a lot and is happy to see his positive reception. Akira is a mangaka that kind of wrote the story of Undead Unluck in universe and loves the cast indiscriminately. Tozuka has also said in an interview that his biggest regret is that he couldn't get published before his mother passed away, which, yeah, definitely supports the idea. So it seems pretty obvious that Tozuka drew upon his own experiences and interests at least a little bit when creating Akira. But unlike other self-inserts, people love Akira. And I think the main reason why is because beyond being a self-insert for the author, Akira is a character that is easy for the readers to insert themselves into. For starters, Akira is a fan of Shonen Jump, something that I'm sure most people reading Undead Unluck will connect with. Creatives reading the series will likely connect with Akira's dream of getting his story published. And I've already mentioned it, but it's worth bringing up again that on a personal level, some people might connect with his relationship with his mother. But I think what will resonate most with readers is how the Undead Unluck cast saved him. When he got his negation ability, Akira was at the lowest point in his life, and it wouldn't be surprising to see someone just give up in these circumstances. But instead, he was inspired to keep fighting against the fate he was dealt, because of all the hardships the cast of Undead Unluck had endured. Specifically, it seems to be Andy and Fuko that resonated with him the most, and encouraged him to continue fighting. Which does paint a very grim picture of what might have happened to Akira in past loops where Andy and Fuko never met. But let's not think about that right now. The point I'm trying to make is that the cast encouraged Akira to push forward even when it felt like everything was stacked against him. And at this point in time, Akira wasn't entirely sure if these people were real, but they still inspired him to keep fighting for his dreams. I think there's a lot of readers that will be able to relate to this in some way. I know for myself that there are a lot of characters that are inspirational to me, and I know I'm not the only one. I know for a fact that there are a lot of Shonen Jump characters that people look up to. This is why I think it's important that Akira accomplished his own dreams before joining the fight, because it really hammers home the idea of fiction being used to inspire someone. If Akira learned that everyone was real and became a mangaka to help everyone first, it wouldn't hit as hard. It's much more satisfying seeing Akira endure all his sufferings and come out the victor as a successful mangaka, then decide to pay back the cast for all they did for him. Honestly, I think the beautiful irony of all of Akira's efforts is that he too might become a source of inspiration for some, which is why I think it's important to acknowledge the self-insert aspect of Akira's character, because being able to see ourselves in Akira is why we were rooting for him and wanted him to succeed. A great side effect of this emotional investment is that it also made it easier for the readers to hate the god responsible for all this. Because I feel like this point in the story is where I started to see a real shift in attitude from the readers towards the antagonist of the series. God was always the end goal. We knew that Union wanted to beat them to free the world from the games God was playing with them, and we had seen a fair amount of tragedies by this point. But Akira's tragedy just felt cruel. And I'm not saying that the other tragedies we've seen so far weren't horrible. Tatiana's completely changed her life, and the timing of its awakening is undeniably cruel. But Akira's just felt malicious, and like it's nothing more than a sick joke. In comparison to others, it's just too planned and far too cruel. Akira's ability activates the moment he picks up the G-Liner. The G-Liner being an artifact that shows you the future when you touch it. An important artifact that would give the cast a much needed advantage against God. But his ability is one that completely erases his presence to the world, to the point that he can't communicate with anyone. It feels designed specifically to taunt the cast, a major advantage that a child stumbles upon, but the child's ability renders the artifact useless in most cases. Because of this, a lot of us started to view God as being a bit more of a sack of shit, and every tragedy after this would only strengthen the feeling, which was a great decision on Tozuka's part. The antagonist of Undead Unluck can't really show up and make themselves known, so making them known through their actions against the cast is brilliant. We never see God, but their influence is felt with each character's backstory, and the reader's resentment towards them grows alongside the cast. Again, Akira wasn't the first tragedy we witnessed, but I'd argue it's the first one that really hammered home that God wasn't some omnipotent being doing this for a higher purpose. Akira's tragedy confirmed that God was malicious, that everything they did was just a source of amusement for them. So, is Akira's involvement engaging or exciting? Obviously. They're exciting because they bring in new mysteries and answers to old ones, as well as new potentials for our cast. They're engaging because Akira is a fun character who has an emotional backstory that is easy to connect and sympathize with. So yes, Akira does manage to be an exciting and engaging addition, all the while being undeniably vital to the story. Again, without Akira, there's nothing else to the story beyond this arc. But despite his undeniable importance to the story, Akira is still not the most important character. Which brings us to our final point for the video. Akira is not the main character of this story. Something that he is aware of. He knows Fuko and Andy are the leading roles, and that the story can't continue without them. If Fuko dies, Andy presumably loses control to Victor, and all that awaits them in that timeline is the tragic ending Akira saw as a child. Akira wants to avoid this outcome. He wants a happier ending for the characters he loves so much, and is willing to endure anything to help them get there. Akira is a supporting character, through and through. It's a role that he fights hard to obtain. Because while God didn't create him to play the leading role, he wasn't expected to play a supporting role either. All that we see implies that Akira was intended to be nothing more than a twisted joke, made for God's own amusement. But despite that, Akira fights back. He fights for his own dreams. Then when that is done, he fights so that he can willingly play the supporting role for the cast he owes everything. At the start of the video, I made a joke about how supporting characters often have two fates. Who, after having exhausted their purpose to the story, will either fade away into the background, or be lucky enough to get a few more moments in the spotlight due to their popularity. The greatest problem a supporting character faces is that ultimately, they aren't the leading role. The story can't focus on them constantly because they're not the focus of the story. A good story wouldn't let the leads be usurped without good reason. This is a big problem for shonen manga since they tend to have a larger cast, and because there are so many characters, some of them are inevitably going to get the short end of the stick. I love characters like Shikamaru, Mirio, and Shinji, but I think all of them are supporting characters that struggle with this problem. They all have their own arcs where they get significant focus, but after that, they just kind of fade into the background. 'Tis the fate of most supporting characters in shonen. If they're lucky, they'll have a few more moments here and there that may or may not be of the same quality as the arc you fell in love with them. And in fairness, the same applies to Akira. It's not like he's some exception to this rule, because as I've already mentioned, Akira is introduced and removed from the story within the order mark. But where Akira does become an exception is that his removal feels intentional and satisfactory for what his character is. Akira does fade into the background. Like literally, he literally fades into the background. Akira is only able to interact with the cast because of Anno On. Anno On only exists because he was created by Akira using the G liner. Because Anno On technically is an Akira Kuno, Anno On can exist and interact with the world in Akira's place. It's a loophole that lets Akira evade Unknown's negation ability. But the G liner breaks when Anno uses it to create the artifact Life is Strange. And using the artifact to restore Rip ages Anno, which ultimately destroys him, meaning that Akira is removed from the world again. It's a tragic outcome that feels intentionally meta on Tozuka's part. Rather than have Akira slowly lose relevance in the background, he goes the literal route by having Akira forced into the background with their final act. The spotlight can no longer return to Akira because his role in the story is complete. From now on, it's up to Andy and Fuko. All Akira can do is watch silently and hope for a better ending. But within this tragedy, there is a beautiful irony. That being that Akira and his role in the story will never be forgotten. In the final moments of the order mark, Andy seemingly figures out who Akira is and reassures him that they won. At this point, Akira may as well be dead to the world. He has no way to interact with it. He can only watch everything unfold silently. He's nothing more than a ghost to the world. Despite that, Andy still calls out to Akira and reassures him. But this gesture is more than an act of reassurance. It's a promise from Andy to Akira that he won't be forgotten. Andy refuses to let Akira's memory die. He won't forget that there was an unknown negator who gave their all for them. For so long as Andy remembers that, Akira will never truly die. It's a beautiful scene that reinforces the lessons learned throughout the arc, while also being a fantastic send-off for Akira. After all the suffering they endured, Akira finally got what they so desperately wanted, an acknowledgement of their existence. It might be a bit late to say this, but I want to make it clear that I don't think Akira is objectively the best supporting character ever created. I really don't want to be seen as one of those typical anime fans gassing up their own series and shooting down other ones. Because the supporting characters I mentioned earlier are ones I love. I was just left disappointed with their usage because I felt they could have been utilized better. Whereas for Akira, their role as a supporting character feels fully utilized, as well as being intentionally meta. He feels like a commentary on the role of a supporting character, and the good and bad that comes with playing that role. That being that while you may get a chance to shine, ultimately you aren't the focus of the story, so it will move on without you. Despite that, Akira puts his all into playing the supporting role. He lives so that the cast can overcome their problem, and willingly pushes himself into the background to accomplish this. He does all this because he believes in them and their ability to present a happier ending. But the reason all of this works so well is because the cast refused to let him fade into the background like so many other supporting characters. We see this through Andy's fist bump, but there's another small detail that I love, which is how Rip refers to Anno after his sacrifice. Throughout the order mark, Anno On is referred to with gender-neutral terms. This was most likely done to further hammer home the unknown element, with their gender being indeterminable to the reader at the time of their introduction. But after being reverted to normal, Rip uses male pronouns for the first time, with Fuko doing the same immediately after, which is such a small detail but a great one nonetheless. It feels like a mini victory for Akira, with him being able to reclaim a small aspect of his lost identity, and further reinforces that the cast won't forget him or what he did for them. After all the suffering Akira endured, these moments right at the end, acknowledging his existence, are a satisfying conclusion for a tragic end. He might be removed from the story, unable to interact with the cast or anyone ever again, but he won't be forgotten. Because Andy will never let that memory die. While a lot of people have come to respect Tozuka and his writing, I think we still tend to gloss over a bit and not give his characters the full praise they deserve. A lot of Tozuka's characters feel like deconstructions of roles in fiction, specifically shonen. Most of the Undead Unluck cast is interesting and fun to talk about because Tozuka puts a lot of thought into what they are and their purpose to the story. There are obviously some characters that I wish he did more with, but despite those hiccups, I'd still argue that Undead Unluck has my favorite shonen cast ever. And I'd like to talk about them more, though I'm not sure how often I will. My original plan was to talk about characters as they became relevant in the anime. That way people could watch these videos without worrying about spoilers. But with the manga seemingly ending soon and the anime not doing too well, the pessimist in me is doubtful we'll get a second season. I'm hopeful I'm wrong, but we'll have to wait and see what happens after the winter OVA coming next year. If the anime does continue, I'll stick to my original plan. If not, I'll just make the videos whenever I feel like it. Regardless of what happens, I'll continue to prioritize using the manga for these videos. Mainly because it'll be easier and faster to make the videos, but also so I can showcase the great art Tozuka is putting out on a weekly schedule. You can just feel the passion through his art, and especially the writing. The amount of creative ideas within this manga is insane, and the love pours through the pages. You can tell the author loves the story and its characters. You can't make a character as great and as heartfelt as Akira without love, and I'm glad that he's received a lot of love in return. It feels like another mini victory for Akira, that he won't be forgotten in universe or by the readers. Because through repeated victories in the popularity polls, it's clear that Akira Kuno is a character that never left the hearts and minds of readers. Just like how he found comfort in fictional characters, Akira himself may become a source of comfort for the readers. Despite how hard fate tried to force him into the background, forgotten by everyone, Akira Kuno and his role as a supporting character will forever be known.